I found out my parents secretly gave money to my brother and sister while telling me to work for everything. So I moved out and cut contact. Years later, my father became seriously ill and they called me for help. Growing up, I always knew my family was a little different, not in the quirky, charming way some families are, but in a more subtle, insidious manner that only became clear as I got older. My parents had a way of making me feel like an outsider in my own home. I have two younger siblings, Ethan and Sophia, who always seemed to be the golden children. I never knew why, but everything seemed to come easier for them, like the universe was handing them life on a silver platter while I was left scrambling to get by. It wasn't just in my head. I distinctly remember one summer when I was about 16. I wanted to join this summer coding camp. I'd been obsessed with computers and programming ever since I could remember, and this camp felt like my ticket to something bigger. I spent weeks psyching myself up to ask my parents, convinced they'd be thrilled about me wanting to do something constructive with my time. But when I finally worked up the courage, their reaction was nothing like I'd hoped. "We can't afford that right now," my dad said flatly, without even looking up from his newspaper. "Why don't you find a summer job instead? You need to learn the value of hard work." I was crushed. I could have understood if they were genuinely strapped for cash, but that same summer they paid for Sophia to go on a high school trip to Europe and got Ethan a brand new car for his 17th birthday. It wasn't just about money, it was about priority, and I was never the priority. The favoritism wasn't always about big-ticket items, though. It was in the everyday moments, too. I remember one time when my dad had promised to take us all to a baseball game. I was ecstatic. It felt like a chance to bond as a family, maybe even break down some of the walls that had been built up over the years. But when the day finally came, Ethan and Sophia were the only ones who got to go. Dad pulled me aside and said he only had enough tickets for two and figured it wouldn't be a big deal if I sat this one out. Those little moments accumulated over the years, stacking on top of one another until they became too heavy to bear. By the time I graduated high school, I was desperate to escape. College was my ticket out, but of course, my parents didn't offer to pay for it. I took out loans, worked nights, and barely scraped by. Meanwhile, Ethan and Sophia had their tuition and living expenses covered by my parents as if it were the most natural thing in the world. They got to experience college without the stress of juggling work and school, and I envied them for it. For years, I tried to convince myself it didn't matter. I told myself that their support or lack thereof wasn't going to define my life. I threw myself into my studies, then my career, hoping that if I worked hard enough, I could prove to them and to myself that I didn't need their help. I could be successful on my own terms. But then I found out about the $300,000. I'd gone home for the first time in years for Thanksgiving, determined to show them that I was doing well, that I didn't need their validation. I kept up appearances, pretending everything was fine, and then, in the middle of the family dinner, I overheard my dad talking to Ethan about managing the money. I didn't think much of it at first, but later that night, curiosity got the best of me. When I asked Ethan about it, he laughed like I was asking about some well-known family secret. "Oh yeah, didn't you know? Mom and Dad gave me and Sophia $300,000 each to help us get started. They did it a couple of years ago." He shrugged it off like it was no big deal, as if every parent handed their kids a small fortune and just forgot to mention it to their other child. I felt my stomach drop. I wanted to scream to confront my parents right then and there, but I couldn't find the words. I just stood there dumbfounded as Ethan went on about his latest investment plans and how he was thinking of starting his own business. I realized in that moment that all my suspicions had been right. My parents really didn't see me as one of their own, at least not in the same way they saw Ethan and Sophia. I didn't stay the rest of the weekend. I packed up my things, mumbled some excuse about a work emergency, and drove home. The entire drive, I couldn't stop replaying every memory, every moment where I'd been pushed aside, wondering what I had done to be so thoroughly rejected by the people who were supposed to love me unconditionally. After that, I cut them off. I changed my number, moved to a new city, and blocked them on social media. I didn't need their toxic influence in my life. I was going to build something for myself without them, and I was going to prove that I was worth more than they'd ever given me credit for. The next few years were a blur of hard work and sleepless nights. I poured everything I had into my startup, working until I could barely keep my eyes open. It wasn't easy, but it was the first time in my life I felt like I had something that was truly mine, something no one could take away. And slowly but surely, things started to fall into place. I landed a few big clients, the company grew, and before I knew it, I was sitting in a boardroom signing the papers that would make me a millionaire. It felt surreal. Part of me wanted to call my parents to tell them about my success, but I stopped myself. They didn't deserve to share in my triumph. They had given up on me long ago, and now I was finally ready to give up on them. But life, as it often does, had other plans. It was a Tuesday afternoon when I got a call from an unknown number. I almost didn't pick up, but something told me to answer. It was my mom. I hadn't heard her voice in years, and for a second I almost didn't recognize it. She sounded older, more fragile, as if the years had finally caught up with her. "Liam," she said, her voice cracking. "We need your help." I sat there stunned as she explained that Dad was sick. They didn't have the money for the treatments he needed, and Ethan and Sophia were in no position to help. I felt the surge of anger rise up in me, but I kept my voice steady. I asked her about the $300,000, and she stammered, saying something about poor investments and bad luck. They had nothing left. "We're family," she pleaded. "We always take care of each other." I wanted to laugh, to scream, to tell her exactly where she could shove her plea for help, but something held me back. Maybe it was the years of conditioning, the part of me that still wanted their approval? Or maybe it was the faintest glimmer of hope that things could be different. I told her I'd think about it and hung up. I stared at my phone for a long time, wondering what kind of twisted game life was playing with me. I had spent so long trying to free myself from their grasp, only for them to claw their way back in just when I thought I was finally free. When I left my family behind, I thought I'd finally put all of that pain and bitterness behind me, but it turns out that kind of betrayal doesn't just go away. It fuels you, it pushes you, and sometimes it consumes you. I threw myself into my career with a kind of intensity I'd never felt before. If I was going to prove to myself that I didn't need them, I was going to have to make it big, and that's exactly what I set out to do. I'd always been good with technology, so I figured if I was going to make a name for myself, it would be in the tech industry. I moved to a new city, took a job at a small startup, and started learning everything I could about coding, product development, and business strategy. I worked ridiculous hours, sometimes sleeping on the office floor and living on vending machine snacks, but I didn't care. Every time I felt like giving up, I reminded myself of the look on my father's face when he told me to earn my way. I was going to do just that. A few years in, I felt ready to take a risk. I had a solid idea for an app that could make communication easier for remote teams, a big need, given the way the world was changing. I scraped together what little savings I had and went all in, quitting my job to start my own company. I had no idea if it would work, but failure wasn't an option. I was running on a mix of desperation and sheer stubbornness. Things were tough in the beginning. I couldn't afford to hire anyone, so I did everything myself: coding, marketing, customer service. There were nights I didn't sleep at all, running on coffee and the drive to prove that I was capable of success on my own. Slowly but surely, though, I started to gain traction. I secured a few small investors, got featured in a tech blog, and soon enough I was seeing downloads and positive feedback from users. It was happening. I was building something real, something that was mine. I hadn't spoken to my family since that Thanksgiving debacle, and honestly it felt like a relief. Every now and then I'd see a post on social media about my siblings. Ethan was still pursuing his so-called investments, and Sophia was living her best life, taking vacations to tropical islands and posting about her luxury lifestyle. I couldn't help but feel a pang of resentment. They were living easy lives thanks to my parents' money, while I was out here busting my ass to make something of myself. But the resentment became less and less as I grew more successful. I realized I didn't need their validation anymore. And then the moment I'd been waiting for finally came. I got an offer from a major tech company interested in buying my app. It was a dream come true. After a few intense negotiations, I signed the papers, and just like that, I was a millionaire. I felt a mix of disbelief and euphoria. I had done it. I had achieved something they never believed I could. I was finally free financially and emotionally. For a while, I lived in blissful solitude. I traveled, bought myself a nice apartment, and indulged in the little things I'd always denied myself. I was happy, or at least I thought I was. But something was still nagging at me, a small voice in the back of my mind that wouldn't let me rest. I wondered if, despite everything, my family would ever care about what I'd accomplished. Did they even know? Would they ever understand what it took for me to get here? Months went by and I convinced myself that I was over it. I didn't need their recognition. I had done this for me. But then one day I got a call, an unknown number. Normally I'd ignore it, but something compelled me to answer. "Hello, Liam." The voice on the other end was unfamiliar, but there was something about it that felt eerily familiar. "It's Mom." My heart sank. After all this time, hearing her voice again felt like a punch to the gut. I hadn't expected to ever hear from her again, and suddenly all the old wounds were ripped open. "What do you want?" I asked, keeping my voice as cold as possible. Liam, it's your father. He's sick. We need your help. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. I didn't know what to say. Part of me wanted to hang up right then and there, but another part of me, a part I thought I'd buried, felt a twinge of guilt. After everything they'd done, they were asking for my help. The audacity was almost laughable. "Why should I help you?" I finally replied, my voice shaking with a mix of anger and something else I couldn't quite name. "You didn't think about me when you gave Ethan and Sophia that money. You didn't care when I was struggling." There was a long silence on the other end, and I could hear her take a shaky breath. "I know, Liam, and I'm sorry. We should have been there for you, but things were complicated." Complicated. That was the word they always used when they didn't want to admit they were wrong. I felt my anger boiling over, but I forced myself to stay calm. "I don't owe you anything," I said firmly. "I built my life without you. Why should I come back now?" "Because he's your father, Liam, and because we're family. We always take care of each other." Family. The word felt foreign coming from her. For as long as I could remember, they had treated me as if I didn't belong, as if I was an inconvenience they had to tolerate. Now they were trying to use that same bond to guilt me into helping them. "I need to think about this," I said, and before she could say another word, I hung up. My hands were shaking, and I could feel the familiar weight of anger and betrayal settling back over me. I had spent so long trying to escape from them, and now they were dragging me back in. For the next few days, I couldn't stop thinking about that call. Part of me wanted to leave them to their fate, to let them suffer the consequences of their own choices. But another part of me, the part that had once longed for their approval, felt a pang of guilt. Despite everything, they were still my family, and for better or worse, that connection was something I couldn't just erase. After a week of agonizing over it, I made a decision. I wasn't going to help them out of the goodness of my heart, but I would hear them out. If they wanted my help, they were going to have to answer some hard questions first. I wanted to know exactly what they had done with that $300,000, and why they thought they could just waltz back into my life and demand my support after years of neglect. I called my mom back and arranged to meet her and my father at a neutral location, a coffee shop near their house. I wasn't ready to go back home, to step into the place where so many painful memories had been made. I needed to keep some distance, both physically and emotionally. When I arrived, they were already there, sitting at a small table by the window. My dad looked old, much older than I remembered. His face was pale and drawn, and he seemed to have shrunk into himself, as if the weight of his illness had physically diminished him. My mom looked tired too, with dark circles under her eyes and a tense expression that I had never seen before. I sat down, keeping my expression neutral. "All right," I said, folding my hands on the table. "Explain what happened to all that money." My mom glanced at my dad, and he gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. "We made some bad investments," she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "We thought we were doing the right thing, but things didn't work out the way we planned." "Bad investments," I repeated, struggling to keep my voice steady. "You gave Ethan and Sophia $300,000 each, and now you're telling me you don't have anything left?" My dad looked down, avoiding my gaze. "Ethan lost a lot of it in some business ventures that went south, and Sophia, well, she has a lot of debt. We tried to help them, but it just made things worse." I felt a bitter laugh escape my lips. "So you're telling me that after years of putting them first, you finally realized that maybe you made a mistake?" They didn't respond, and the silence that followed was almost unbearable. I could see the regret in their eyes, but it didn't make me feel any better. If anything, it only made me angrier. They had spent years ignoring me, and now when they were at rock bottom, they were expecting me to pick up the pieces. "I don't know if I can help you," I said, standing up. "I have a life of my own now, and I don't think you realize how much damage you've done." My mom reached out, grabbing my arm. "Please, Liam," she pleaded, tears streaming down her face. "We're sorry. We know we made mistakes, but we're still your family. Doesn't that mean anything to you?" I looked down at her hand, then back up at her face. For a moment, I saw the mother I had once loved, the woman who had sung me to sleep and kissed my scrapes and bruises. But that person was gone, replaced by someone who had chosen to put me last time and time again. "I need some time to think," I said, gently pulling my arm away. "I'll let you know what I decide." As I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt a strange sense of relief. I had finally said what I needed to say, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like I was in control. My parents might have called me back into their lives, but I was the one holding the cards now, and whatever I decided, it would be on my terms. After that tense meeting with my parents, I felt like I'd barely scratched the surface of what I needed to know. I had thought that finally confronting them would give me some sense of closure, but instead, it only raised more questions. I found myself thinking about the money again and again, obsessing over how they could have handed my siblings such a fortune, only to end up begging me for help now. It felt like some kind of twisted joke. The next day, I called Ethan. I hadn't spoken to him directly in years, but if I was going to consider helping my parents, I needed the full story. Surprisingly, he picked up right away, his voice casual, as if we hadn't gone years without speaking. Liam. Hey man, long time, he said, a little too cheerful. Yeah, Ethan, we need to talk, I replied, skipping any pleasantries. I met with Mom and Dad yesterday. They told me about the money. There was a brief silence on the other end, and I could almost hear the wheels turning in his head. Yeah, I figured they might mention that, he said slowly. Look, I know what it sounds like, but things just didn't go as planned. Really? I replied, my voice laced with sarcasm. Because it sounds to me like you both got handed a small fortune while I was left with nothing, and now you're broke. How exactly does that happen? He let out a long sigh, and I could sense the frustration in his voice. I made some bad investments, okay? I tried to get a business off the ground, but I didn't have the experience. It's not like I planned for things to go south. Sure, Ethan, but what about Sophia? Mom said she's in debt too. What happened there? He hesitated, and I could tell there was more to the story than he was letting on. Sophia, well, she got into some trouble with credit cards. She was living a little beyond her means, and things got out of hand. I tried to help her, but it was too much for both of us. I felt a mix of anger and disbelief. They had both been given the opportunities I'd only dreamed of, and they had squandered them so easily. And you just expected Mom and Dad to keep bailing you out? I asked, unable to hide the edge in my voice. It wasn't like that, he replied defensively. Look, I know you think we had it easy, but it wasn't a walk in the park. They had expectations, Liam. They wanted us to live up to some impossible standard, and when things went wrong, they just threw money at the problem and hoped it would go away. I wanted to feel sorry for him, but I couldn't. He was talking about being handed hundreds of thousands of dollars, as if it were some kind of burden. I had worked for everything I had, and here he was, acting like he'd been the victim of bad luck. Well, now they're out of money, I said, cutting the conversation short, and they're asking me to bail them out. So tell me, why should I? Ethan was silent for a moment, and I could hear him take a deep breath. Because they're our parents, Liam. We owe them something, don't we? I didn't answer. The idea that I owed them anything felt like a slap in the face, but there was a part of me, a small, irrational part, that couldn't completely ignore the bond we shared. Despite everything, they were still my family, and I couldn't completely turn my back on them without at least hearing them out. After I hung up, I called Sophia. If I was going to do this, I needed to hear her side of the story too. Unlike Ethan, she was a little harder to reach. It took a few tries before she finally picked up, and when she did, her voice was tinged with exhaustion. Liam, I didn't expect to hear from you, she said, sounding surprised. Yeah, well, I didn't expect to hear from Mom and Dad either, I replied. They told me about the money, Sophia. I know about the debt. I need to understand what happened. She sighed, and I could almost picture her rubbing her temples the way she used to when we were kids, and she was stressed about something. It's complicated, Liam. I thought I had things under control, but then one thing led to another, and well, here we are. Complicated how I pressed, unwilling to let her off the hook that easily. She took a moment before answering. I was trying to keep up, you know. All my friends were traveling, buying nice things, and I just got caught up in it. I didn't realize how bad it was until it was too late, and by then, the debt was piling up faster than I could pay it off. So, you're telling me you spent it all on clothes and vacations? I asked, unable to keep the judgment out of my voice. It's not that simple, Liam, she said, her tone defensive. I know I made mistakes, but it wasn't just about the money. I was trying to live up to expectations to be the person they wanted me to be. And how did that work out for you? I asked, my anger bubbling over. She didn't answer, and I could feel the weight of her silence. I wanted to believe that she was just a victim of circumstance, that somehow all of this was beyond her control. But deep down, I knew better. They had been given every advantage, every opportunity, and they had thrown it all away. I can't just hand over money to fix this, Sophia, I said finally. I need to know that things will be different this time. I'm not going to be your safety net. She let out a shaky breath, and I could hear the defeat in her voice. I understand, Liam. I know you don't owe us anything. I just wish things had been different. As I hung up the phone, I felt a strange sense of relief. I had finally said my piece, and now the decision was mine to make. I wasn't going to let them guilt me into helping them, but if I did choose to step in, it would be on my terms. I agreed to meet with my parents one last time to discuss the specifics. I told them that I wasn't going to just hand over money, and if they wanted my help, they were going to have to play by my rules. We met at the same coffee shop, and this time I came prepared with a list of conditions. I'll cover Dad's medical expenses. I began looking them both in the eye, but I'm not giving you cash. I'll set up a trust, and the money will only go towards his treatment and necessary living expenses. Anything beyond that, and you're on your own. My mom looked relieved, but my dad's face fell. What about Ethan and Sophia? He asked, his voice barely above a whisper. They're in trouble too, Liam. They need your help. I shook my head. They made their choices. I'll help you, but I'm not responsible for their mistakes. If they want my support, they'll have to earn it. They looked at each other, a mixture of resignation and disappointment in their eyes. I could tell they wanted more, that they were hoping I'd swoop in and save the day, but I wasn't the same person they had pushed aside all those years ago. I had worked too hard to let them drag me back down. I'm giving you a way out, I said, standing up. Take it or leave it. As I walked out of the coffee shop, I felt a strange sense of satisfaction. I had finally taken control of my own narrative, and for the first time, I was making decisions based on my own terms. I wasn't going to be their safety net, but I wasn't going to abandon them completely either. I was done playing by their rules, and now they would have to live with mine. In the weeks that followed, I set up the trust and made arrangements for my dad's medical care. I kept my distance, refusing to let them back into my life any more than necessary. I had done my part, and now it was up to them to figure out the rest. After setting up the trust for my dad's medical expenses, I tried to distance myself, hoping that would be the end of it. But as with most things involving my family, nothing is ever that simple. I soon found myself in a new web of complications, especially with my siblings. Ethan and Sophia were furious about the conditions I had imposed, and they weren't shy about letting me know. The first confrontation came from Ethan. He called me one night, his voice laced with bitterness. "You think you're better than us now, huh?" he sneered. "Just because you made a little money, you think you can waltz back in and call all the shots." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "I'm not trying to be better than anyone, Ethan, but I have to protect myself. I'm willing to help, but I'm not going to throw money into a black hole." "A black hole? Is that what you think of us?" he snapped. "We're your family, Liam. We're supposed to look out for each other." "Funny, I don't remember you looking out for me when I was struggling to get by," I replied, unable to hide the edge in my voice. "You had everything handed to you and you still managed to blow it all. I'm not going to make the same mistake." Ethan didn't have a comeback for that. Instead, he hung up, leaving me alone with the echo of his anger. I knew he would be upset, but a part of me had hoped that he would understand. I wasn't doing this to punish him. I was trying to help, but I wasn't going to sacrifice myself in the process. A few days later, Sophia called. Unlike Ethan, she wasn't as confrontational, but her disappointment was palpable. "I know you think you're doing the right thing," she said, her voice soft, almost pleading. "But we're your siblings, Liam. We've made mistakes, sure, but we're still family." "I know, Sophia," I replied, feeling a pang of guilt, "but I can't keep enabling those mistakes. If you want my help, you have to show me that you're willing to change." She sighed, and I could hear the weariness in her voice. "I don't know if I can do that, Liam. I've tried, but I don't know." There was a vulnerability in her voice that I hadn't heard before, and for a moment I felt a surge of compassion. I wanted to help her to make things right, but I also knew that I couldn't do it for her. She had to want it for herself, and that was something I couldn't control. After our conversation, I decided to lay out some additional conditions for any further support. I called both of them and told them that I would only consider helping with their financial issues if they agreed to go to financial counseling and take accountability for their spending. I wasn't sure if they would agree, but I knew it was the only way I could be involved without feeling like I was just throwing money away. To my surprise, they both agreed. I wasn't sure if it was out of genuine desire to change or just desperation, but either way, it felt like a small victory. I set up appointments with a financial counselor and made it clear that this was their last chance. If they didn't follow through, I was out, no questions asked. The next few weeks were a strange mix of hope and anxiety. Part of me wanted to believe that they would take this opportunity to turn things around, but another part of me was waiting for the other shoe to drop. I knew my family too well to expect an easy resolution, and I braced myself for whatever was to come. And as usual, things didn't go as planned. One evening, I got a call from the financial counselor. She sounded frustrated, almost exasperated. "Mr. Evans, I wanted to reach out because I've had some difficulties with your siblings. They've missed multiple appointments, and when they do show up, they're not exactly cooperative." I felt a surge of anger and disappointment. I had put so much effort into setting this up, and they couldn't even be bothered to take it seriously. "Thank you for letting me know," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "I'll talk to them." After I hung up, I felt a familiar sense of betrayal wash over me. I had given them a chance, a real chance to get their lives together, and they had thrown it away. I called Ethan first, but he didn't pick up. Then I tried Sophia, and after a few rings, she finally answered. "Sophia, what's going on?" I asked, unable to keep the frustration out of my voice. "The counselor told me you've been missing appointments." She sighed, and I could hear the resignation in her voice. "I'm sorry, Liam. I thought I could do it, but it's harder than I thought." "That's not an excuse," I replied, my patience wearing thin. "I set this up because I wanted to help you, but you have to meet me halfway. If you're not willing to put in the effort, then I'm done. I can't keep doing this." There was a long silence on the other end, and for a moment I thought she had hung up. But then she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I know. I'm sorry, Liam. I didn't mean to let you down. I didn't know what to say. I wanted to believe her, but I wasn't sure if I could. I had given them so many chances, and each time they had found a way to let me down. I felt trapped in a cycle of hope and disappointment, unable to break free. Over the next few days, I tried to distance myself, focusing on my own life and letting go of any expectations I had for them. I had done everything I could, and now it was up to them. If they wanted to change, they would have to do it on their own. And then, just when I thought I had finally found some peace, my mother called. Her voice was frantic, filled with a level of desperation I hadn't heard before. "Liam, please, you have to help us," she cried, her words tumbling out in a rush. "Your father's condition has gotten worse, and we don't have the money for his treatment. We're going to lose everything." I felt a wave of frustration and sadness wash over me. I had already set up a trust for his medical expenses, and I knew that there should be enough money to cover his treatment. "What do you mean you don't have the money?" I asked, my voice sharp. "I set up the trust specifically for this." She hesitated, and I could hear the fear in her voice. "There were unexpected expenses," she stammered. "We had to use some of the money for other things, and now there's not enough left." I took a deep breath, trying to keep my composure. "I told you that money was for Dad's treatment, nothing else." "How could you do this?" "I'm sorry, Liam," she whispered, her voice breaking. "We didn't have a choice. We were desperate." I felt a surge of anger and betrayal, but I forced myself to stay calm. "All right," I said finally. "I'll take care of it, but this is the last time. If you can't respect the conditions I've set, then I'm done." After I hung up, I felt a strange sense of relief. I had finally set a boundary, one that I knew I wouldn't break. I had done my part, and now it was up to them to live with the consequences. In the weeks that followed, I managed the trust myself, overseeing every expense and making sure that the money was used solely for my dad's treatment. It was exhausting, but it gave me a sense of control that I hadn't felt before. I was no longer at their mercy, and I wasn't going to let them drag me back into their chaos. By the end of it all, I had done everything I could. I had set up the trust-imposed conditions and given them multiple chances to prove themselves, but they had chosen their path, and now they would have to live with it. I was done playing the role of the savior, done trying to fix their mistakes. I had finally taken control of my own life, and I wasn't going to let anyone take that away from me. I had spent too long trying to earn their love, trying to prove that I was worth something, but now I knew that I didn't need their approval. I had built something for myself, something that they couldn't take away. And as I walked away from it all, I felt a strange sense of peace. I had finally broken free from their hold, and I was ready to start a new chapter of my life, one that was defined by my own choices, not theirs. I had done my part, and now I was ready to move on. After setting up the final arrangements for my dad's medical care and imposing strict boundaries on my family, I felt a weight lift off my shoulders. I had done everything within my power to help, and now I was done. For the first time in years, I felt like I could finally breathe again. I spent the next few months focusing on myself. I invested time in friendships that had taken a backseat during my years of working nonstop. I even met someone, Emily, a smart, compassionate woman who had no idea about my family drama. Being with her was like a breath of fresh air. She was interested in me, not my financial situation or my family history. For once, I could just be myself without the weight of all the old baggage. Emily and I grew close quickly. I confided in her about my family, all the drama and betrayal, and she listened without judgment, She didn't try to tell me what to do or how to feel. She just let me vent. She was exactly what I needed, someone who saw me for who I was, flaws and all. One evening as we sat together watching the sunset, she took my hand and asked, "Do you ever think about reconnecting with them?" The question caught me off guard. I thought I had put all of that behind me, but hearing her say it brought all those old emotions back to the surface. "Honestly, I don't know if there's anything left to reconnect to," I replied, staring out at the horizon. "They've hurt me so many times, and I don't think I can go through that again." She nodded, squeezing my hand. "Sometimes family isn't about blood. It's about the people who are there for you, who lift you up instead of tearing you down." Her words stayed with me long after that conversation. I had always thought of family as something I was born into, something that was a part of me whether I liked it or not. But maybe it was something I could choose. Maybe I could build my own family, one that wasn't defined by betrayal and resentment. In the weeks that followed, I started to reevaluate what family meant to me. I began reaching out to old friends, people I had lost touch with over the years. I rebuilt those connections, and in doing so I found a sense of belonging that I hadn't felt in a long time. I realized that I didn't need my biological family to feel complete. I could create my own support system, one that was built on mutual respect and love. One day out of the blue, I received a message from Mark, a childhood friend of Ethan, who I hadn't seen in years. He'd heard about my success and wanted to catch up. I was hesitant at first, unsure of what he might want, but curiosity got the better of me and I agreed to meet him for coffee. As we sat down, Mark looked at me with an intensity that took me by surprise. "Liam, I've got something to tell you. It's about your family." I felt a knot form in my stomach. I had thought I was done with all of that, but here it was dragging me back in once again. "What about them?" I asked, trying to keep my voice steady. He took a deep breath before speaking. "I don't know how much you know, but Ethan and Sophia, they weren't just bad with money. They were involved in some pretty shady stuff. I'm talking loans, gambling debts, things that could get them in serious trouble." I felt a surge of anger mixed with disbelief. I had known they were irresponsible, but this was something else entirely. "Why are you telling me this?" I asked, struggling to process the information. "Because I thought you deserved to know the truth," he replied, his voice steady. "They were using the money your parents gave them to fund some risky ventures, and when it all fell apart, they tried to cover it up. That's why your parents were so desperate. They weren't just out of money, they were in over their heads." It all made sense now. The pleas for help, the mysterious unexpected expenses, the guilt tripping, it had all been part of a larger scheme. I felt a sense of betrayal that was almost too much to bear. I had given them chance after chance, and they had lied to me every step of the way. For a moment I considered confronting them, but then I realized it wouldn't change anything. They would deny it, deflect, and somehow try to make it my fault. I was done playing their games. I had spent too long letting their actions dictate my life, and I wasn't going to let them control me any longer. I thanked Mark for telling me the truth and left the coffee shop feeling a strange sense of closure. I knew now that I had made the right decision by cutting them off. They had chosen their path, and now they would have to live with the consequences. I went home that night and told Emily everything. She listened, holding my hand as I poured out all the anger and hurt I had been carrying for so long. When I finished, she looked at me with a calm determination that gave me a sense of peace. "You did the right thing, Liam. You don't owe them anything." Hearing her say it made me realize that I had been holding on to a sense of obligation that was never mine to bear. I had done my best to help them, but at the end of the day, they were responsible for their own choices. I couldn't save them, and I didn't need to. From that moment on, I made a conscious decision to let go. I blocked their numbers, deleted their contacts, and removed myself from the cycle of guilt and manipulation that had defined my life for so long. I was done trying to fix what was broken, and instead I focused on building something new with Emily by my side. I began to create a life that was truly my own. I invested in friendships, built a network of people who supported me, and finally found a sense of belonging that I had always longed for. I realized that family wasn't something you were born into. It was something you built one connection at a time. A year later, Emily and I got married in a small, intimate ceremony with just a handful of close friends. It was nothing like the grand weddings I had seen growing up, but it was perfect. I was surrounded by people who loved me for who I was, not what I could give them. For the first time in my life, I felt at peace. As we stood together exchanging vows under a clear blue sky, I knew that I had finally found my place. I had redefined what family meant to me, and in doing so, I had freed myself from the chains of the past. I was no longer Liam, the black sheep, the forgotten son. I was Liam, a husband, a friend, a man who had found his way back to himself. In the end, I didn't need my family's approval to feel complete. I had built a life that was filled with love, respect, and joy, a life that was truly mine. And as I looked into Emily's eyes, I knew that I had finally found the family I had always deserved.